L'Shem Hashem Na'aseh V'Natziach, Shabbat Shalom. This week's Parsha Chodesh Tov is Shoftim. And I wanted to talk about a very hot topic in the news and current events, and unfortunately, and that is it a good idea to abolish the police? Or maybe even defund the police? The answer is absolutely no from this week's Parsha. The beginning of the Parsha says, Shoftim v'shotrim titen lecha. The Torah commands and demands of us that we have to put police and what? Judges. There should be a court of law in every Jewish city, every village. So there shouldn't be lawlessness. And I want to even go further. I want to thank one of my friends. This is actually even one of the 7th commandments. 7 go to heaven. The non-Jews also have to have a judicial system. So somebody that sins and commits a crime to one another can be brought to justice. Because if the non-Jews keep 7, like if they don't do blasphemy and they don't do adultery, one of them is they have a court system, they'll go to heaven. Now, why does the Torah want us to have courts, judges, and police? First of all, I saw something so beautiful from the Netziv, the Volozhin Rosh Yeshiva. He says, what's the connection to last week's Parsha? Last week's Parsha says, Kebirkat, the last words of last week's Parsha, Kebirkat Hashem Elokecha Asher Natan Lach. According to the blessing that God gives you, sacrifice and give Him offerings when you come to visit Him in Jerusalem, the holy city. So, the Netziv says, Hashem is telling us, there is only blessing in the world if you respect justice. Obviously, we're not talking about corrupt police or corrupt judges. That's the worst of the worst. And God is so infuriated by those people. But we're talking about ethical, good police and judges. If they're not respected and cherished, there's no blessing in the world. And that's why the Netziv brings that actually, we know there was a great famine that caused Naomi and Ruth, the great-grandmother of King David, to leave Israel and go back to Moab. And it's because the Chachamim say it was a time where people judged the judges, which they were critical of their judges. They didn't respect the judges. They didn't respect their authority, and then that's why they were punished with a famine. There is no blessing in the world if we don't respect the rule of law. As we see before our eyes, they burn down cities, and it's just terrible. Now, Rashi says, what is the difference between a shofet, a judge, a dayan, and a shoter? The difference is very simple, that shoter is like a police, the sheriff. If you get evicted, you don't pay your rent, well, guess what? A lot of people are lazy bums. Why should the guy listen to the court? Somebody needs to, physically remove the person from the premises. And I wanted to say a very important chidush to those people that are lunatics, those lunatics that think that it's a good idea to not have any police anywhere. If we read Divrei Hayamim, Rashi brings a fascinating thing. It says over there in Divrei Hayamim chapter 18, and David did righteous justice to the entire nation of Israel, and then there was the chief of staff, the chief of the army and the police, Yoab ben Surya, his nephew. So Rashi says, this doesn't make any context. What's the context? David was a wonderful king and judged, and probably that's where Solomon got his wonderful sense of judgment from his father. But why is it sticking in Yoab? So listen to a Rashi. It says, Ilmale emato shel oyav lo yachol David la'asod dayanim. If not for people to fear Yoab was a fearless and very strong general that in those times was also in charge of policing people. If not for Yoab, none of David's judgments would have been enforced. Nobody would have feared David, and then they would have just say, fly a kite. Because Now I want to say the chidush. In the time of David, if you learn the Navi, I learned with my son the last year. We learned Shmuel Aleph and Shmuel Bet through the Midrash. The Jews were totally righteous at the time. There was nobody doing any idol worship. They needed judges. They needed police. In a time where everybody was righteous, they needed police. If not for that, people would just tell the judge, go fly a kite. But because people never want to... We people have a sense of if we could get away with it, we never want to be on the losing side. We always want to take advantage. That's why it says in Iyov, Ayil pere Adam Yulad. If you don't have good parents to teach you how to be a mensch, a human being, human beings are worse than wild animals. Which wild animals kills 6 million others? You have Hitler. That tendency, that terrible tendency of trying to be narcissistic and totally merciless exists in us. We saw it. We see it throughout history. People forget history. So I wanted to just bring out this idea. How much foolish could you be? In a time where everybody was God-fearing and ethical, Rashi is saying that if not for Yoav, nobody would have listened to David Melech Yisrael Chai V'Kayim's judgment. So much so now that we're living in the time of Ikvat Mashiach. There has never been such audacity and people not respecting their parents or any sense of authority. We're living in a democracy where people just want to be autonomous and do whatever makes them feel good. So much so more, 1,000,000 trillion times more we need. Because psychologically, I want to explain this to you people. The Torah always wants us to fear heaven, and there has to be representatives of God that will remind us to be authority figures so we don't sin. Our parents, that's one of the 10 commandments, respect them. Why? Because your parents, if they're good parents, they're ethical, they teach you not to be a wild animal and act like a mishuggah, a crazy person, lunatic, and riot and loot and harm honest people that made an honest living. And same thing, we go more. The Torah says respect your rabbis, like it says in this week's parsha. We have to get up in front of the elders. We have to respect the king. Somebody that doesn't respect the king, we need to get married, because a spouse always, when you have a spouse, then you don't go and do hanky-panky. You're not going to fool around with your life. You have a set family, and you're always worried that you're going to frustrate and disappoint your better half, and it keeps you in line. It's clearly in the Chachamim say that the reason why a person should get married is because it makes him stay pure and innocent and be on the right way instead of just acting animalistic and sleeping around. And the ethics of our father in the Mishnah, we say that the idea even goes further. Look in chapter 3, I beg you, of Pirkei Avot, the most classical ethical book for the Jews. It says over here in Pirkei Avot, it says, Rabbi Chananya B'Sagan HaKohanim says we should always pray, whether you hate Trump or love him, we always have to pray that the government should exist. Even though I put a nasty post today, the truth is, any type of government is better than anarchy. Anarchy is the worst of any multiple choice. That's why it says you should pray for the success of the government, because if not for them, people would eat each other alive. And where does they get this? What's the source? The Gra and the Mefarshim here say it's actually Gemara in Avodah Zarah. Habakkuk, which actually a great prophet, was buried in Iran, in Persia. He says, Ta'aseh Adam kidageh hayam. God made people like fish. The Talmud says why, the Gemara says why are people compared to fish? It says because just like fish, the larger one swallows the other one alive. If not for fear of punishment by the government, people would eat each other alive. Like we saw in LA twice, we saw it. We saw it in the riots twice all around the country in the last few months. And it's the Rabbi Meir Shapiro says, actually the Daf HaYomi, the inventor of the Daf HaYomi, Rabbi Meir Shapiro says, why was Rabban Chanina always the Segana Kohanim, the vice Kohen Gadol, king of the Kohens. Why did he never merit to be the Kohen Gadol, the king of the Kohens, the prime Kohen? Because he says he wasn't a good politician. The Romans were in charge of the office during the corrupt end of the Second Temple. And since he didn't do whatever they said and didn't bribe them, they never let him become Kohen Gadol. Even though, so he really should have hated the government because they never he was the greatest Kohen, the most righteous Kohen, and they barred him, they stopped him from getting to the highest echelons of being his appropriate position. That's why Rabbi Meir Shapira says, even him, he says, even me, that I should have an animosity towards the government. They didn't let me, they interfered with the religious vote that I should become the prime Kohen, the prince and king of the Kohen. Even I am saying it's better to have government than anarchy, because in the end of the day, people, if they think they could get away with it, they'll get away with anything. There's no limit to how cruel they could be. And that's why the Torah, when it's giving us this commandment, it's giving us in the time of King David and Shlomo, when the temple exists and the Jews are so righteous. Even then, if not for fear of the police, people would not do the right thing. So much so now that we have so much atheism and darkness, and people, they call light darkness, darkness light. They're upside down, their values. So, of course, everybody, we're against any unethical and any punishment that is not according to the Torah. And no person deserves to get punished by innocent, or if he overpunished, that's a big sin. But in the end of the day, to defund the police is absolutely a terrible idea beyond any measure. Have a wonderful Chodesh and a wonderful Shabbat.